Hi, welcome to the Enterprise 2.0 Workbench, Episode 10. My name is John Brunswick, and today we're going to take a look at using WebCenter Portal to place orders in eBusiness Suite. We're going to do this by using eBusiness Suite SOA Gateway and creating a very simple custom service within that gateway. We're going to invoke this service using BPEL. When a user logs into WebCenter Portal, they're going to be authorized to go to an order placement section, and when they go to place their order, it's going to invoke a BPEL service, which in turn will call back to our custom service in eBusiness Suite. It's important to note that this is a simple proof, and it just gives us an idea of how some of the different technologies function. In production, there are things we'd want to do with a lot more rigor and the appropriate technologies. With that being said, we're going to take a look from an end-user standpoint and then peel back the layers to do a technical deep dive to see how the solution comes together. Let's take a look.
So we'll start taking a look from the end-user perspective. If we go ahead and open our browser, I actually have the portal page queued up that we'll end up using to test out our order placement. I'll go ahead and log in. And on the basis of my login, I'm going to see an additional tab here now called Order Sample. And if I head into the Order Sample tab, on the left-hand side we see a whole collection of inventory items. On the right-hand side we see a checkout associated with them. So in our example, when we select an item, what you'll notice is that the inventory ID here on the right will get populated with that inventory item ID. And so for instance, if we want to select the monitor, you can see that when we clicked on select item, it populated the inventory ID of 488. We're just doing this for demonstration purposes again, because really the key here is that we're going to now invoke the BPEL process to talk back to the SOA gateway. We do this by clicking place order, and when I click place order, it calls the BPEL service, it passes in the inventory ID. The BPEL service, as we'll go through in a moment, actually enriches the service call with a bunch of mandatory information that the SOA gateway is expecting. And so in a moment, when the service call completes, it's going to return back an order number that we'll be able to go into eBusiness Suite and take a look at. So on the screen, we can see that eBusiness has responded to our order and actually now given us an order ID that's a confirmation code. So if I go ahead and just put that order ID on my clipboard, I'm going to go ahead now and log into eBusiness Suite and take a look. What we'll see on the left-hand side, we see all the areas of eBusiness that we have access to. What we're going to want to do is actually open up our area around orders. And when we do that, I'll just give it a second. We're going to go ahead and just take a look at the most recently placed orders. And we should see our order within eBusiness. Go ahead. And now that we have the order system loaded up, what we can do, we can actually just double click on today's orders. And we should see a couple because I ran this simulation earlier. And so there are more orders than just the one that we placed right now. But here we are. We're taking a look at today's orders, and we can see order 66429 correlates back with order 66429 in our WebCenter interface. We'll notice that for order 6642, we can see, if we scroll over to the right here, it gave us a timestamp for our particular order. We can see that it was made today, and that's according to what I've set up on my server. You can also see that we defaulted a bunch of other information about our order. If I go ahead and open up that particular order, we'll actually be able to see some line item detail about the order. Now, the one thing to note is that given that organizations could have complex rules behind the scenes with eBusiness, with regard to how things are shipped and availability, we don't take that into account within our simple test here. So again, this is more just to do some very basic experimentation with getting an order over into eBusiness. So when the record loads up here in just a moment, we'll actually be able to see the monitor that we went ahead and ordered through WebCenter. We can see down here the description is monitor 21-inch, etc. And if we go ahead and just expand the window here, we can see all the additional line item information about our order. So that's it from an end user standpoint. It's fairly straightforward. Again, so we're able to go ahead, place our order within the WebCenter interface, get an order number ID, and then go back into eBusiness Suite and look it up. Now we're going to take a look at the technical components behind the scenes and how they allowed us to do this. From a technical standpoint, let's go ahead and start by looking within JDeveloper. Now, with our portal page, we didn't do anything particularly out of the norm with regard to creating and consuming a data control. So what ends up happening when we create our order page, and let's just go ahead and real quickly build one together here, just so we get a sense of it. When we build out the order page, we just end up dragging and dropping our data control, just like we would in any other situation. So again, I'm going to go ahead and create a blank page, just so we can kind of get a sense here of how we put the WebCenter portion together. And once our page is up in our editor, I'm really going to rely on the EBS data control here on the left-hand side to create the components within the page that we're going to leverage. So let's just go ahead to give ourselves a little bit more room. I'm going to drag and drop a panel box. And again, just for demonstration, let's go ahead and give ourselves some room to work with within the editor here. So now that I have some space on the screen just for us to kind of test, what you'll notice is that within this EBS web service, I have a process method, and the method takes an input parameter and ends up returning a string. And so all that we did was we went ahead in our example and I dragged and dropped the method, went ahead and created an ADF parameter form. And this parameter form went ahead and called our BPEL service and passed through the numeric value that I had gone ahead and placed into the form field. So if you remember from our example, the only thing besides this that we ended up doing was going ahead and having some items that would pre-populate this value that would call our service. So now if we take a look at what actually that service is, I have a virtual machine here that's running actually a downloadable instance of a lot of the SOA components. And within this instance, we're actually calling the BPEL process that I have within a project here. And so if we take a look at a visual overview of the BPEL process, this EBS order process, this is an endpoint that we end up exposing in a WSDL that we call from within our WebCenter application. There are only a couple things here that are non-standard. One of them is around this assignment ID. And what we're able to do, we're able to actually take our input from the method that is called that supports the BPEL process. And this input here on the left-hand side, we're actually going to use that to again capture the particular inventory item ID. And we're going to pass it into what ends up calling our service in the SOA Gateway. And so if we look on the right-hand side here, there are a couple fields that we didn't have to deal with in WebCenter that we do here. And you'll notice that these fields, things like responsibility, responsible application, org ID, those are all fields that pertain to eBusiness. And so what we're doing here is we're using BPEL to actually enrich our call that we make out to the SOA Gateway within EBS. And here what you'll notice, we actually end up fixing some things like the org ID. We also end up fixing things like quantity. And we could go ahead and make these variable as well. But the nice part is that not only do we provide some abstraction because we're using the BPEL process, but when we invoke the service, what we're able to do is we actually have to pass with it some authentication information. And the way that we end up doing this is within our composite XML, we have some information here that actually adds some additional information to our headers that we use to call out to EBS. And so you can see here that just for the sake of demonstration, EBS is protecting itself with the username token client policy. And what we're doing is going ahead and making sure that we pass through our credentials that we want to use to access that service. At the end of our process, we end up making sure that we relay the order ID that came back from EBS. And the way that we set up our BPEL process, it's called a synchronous process. Our user interface waits until it goes ahead and receives that reply. We could have it asynchronous, where we could launch the process, have our UI continue on, but not have to wait for any sort of confirmation immediately back from eBusiness. Now, within our virtual machine here, if we go ahead and if we log into Enterprise Manager, we can actually trace through and see how we went ahead and invoked the service. So if we look at this create order process, we can see here that we've made 2 calls into it today. And if I drill into an instance of a call, it can actually show us and trace through how it built out our particular call. So we can see here that we had a particular payload that included an inventory ID, and if we go back to our WebCenter UI, we can see in fact that the inventory ID was 488. If we come into our BPEL UI, we can see that it's 488, and we can see that as the BPEL process progresses, it goes ahead and starts to include other information into our header with our request that ultimately makes its way to EBS. And so all of the items we're seeing here in the XML are default values that we need in order to interact with EBS specific to our particular sample service. Now the nice thing here is that we get total management and visibility over if the call was successful and what information EBS returned back to us. And we can see here that EBS in fact is returning that order ID to confirm. So 66429, we come back into our WebCenter UI and we see 66429. So again, BPEL does a nice job of not only kind of brokering and managing the enrichment of our service call, but it gives us a nice way to go ahead and step through to make sure that there weren't any errors in what we were doing calling into the service. So now from the standpoint of eBusiness, I'm going to go ahead and log out and log in as a user that has administrative privileges. And what we'll be able to see is that on the EBS side, we actually have some really nice capabilities there to do some diagnostics as well. So within the interface and there are directions in this blog post, there are capabilities to view and look at all of the custom services that we've gone ahead and registered with the SOA Gateway, just as if they were a normal service that was native to the system. And so there's a whole capability around looking at the registered services and also looking at debugging and taking a look at requests that have come in, the status of those requests, and actually getting down to the level where we can look at the XML that was posted into the system and any sort of response that came back from the system. So it's a nice additional view to take a look at and help debug anything that we're doing with the system. So if I go ahead and scroll down, I see our integrated SOA Gateway. And if I jump into the integration repository, that's actually where we'll be able to see all the different types of web services that EBS offers up. Now in our case, there are native services that deal with order management. What we did was those services natively have some complex inputs, and we really slimmed it down to make it as straightforward as possible, again, just for our example. So if I take a look at anything related to the sales orders, you can see here there are a bunch of different services exposed for any given point in the life cycle of an order. What we've gone ahead and done, though, is created our own, and we can see down here at the bottom that we have a service available to us that is the simple EBS order. And if I drill into it, we can go ahead and see some of the parameters that the service takes, as well as grant any particular security that's required for the service. Okay? So we can see down here we have one method, which is create simple order. And toward the top of the page here, I can go ahead and open up the WSDL, which is actually the WSDL that we registered with BPEL. And a link to the source code for the BPEL process is also included in this post. And this is actually how BPEL was able to reach back out to eBusiness to interoperate with it. Now, if we wanted to, again, we could go into the administration area of the integration repository. And from there, we can actually see the different service calls that we've made. And so we can see here a particular instance, and if we go to the details, this is actually the order that we placed together in our live example. We can see what the SOAP request looked like. So let's go ahead and open it up and take a look. All right. So we can see that our request came through for item 488 for an order of 1. And we can see at the top here all this additional information that was actually put together by the BPEL process. That's nothing that we had to do ourselves. It went ahead and put the rest of the information together in the request. If I go back here, we can also take a look at the service response. And we can see here that eBusiness responded back by saying, in fact, the order had been placed, and here is the order code. Now, in the post, we go into details about how we actually loaded up and created our custom service. And the nice part is that what we cover applies to any custom service that you would want to create on top of eBusiness. Again, there are a whole series of native services out of the box, but potentially if we want to do something specific, there is a lot of background and information around how to interact with eBusiness through PL SQL and some other standardized formats that, again, is very easy to find and incorporate into your own services that you might want to build on top of eBusiness. I hope that this has been interesting, and there's definitely a lot of content and material here. I tried to include a fair number of the technical steps and the source code in the post. I look forward to hearing from you guys. Appreciate your time.